Good morning, good afternoon, good day. Once again, my name is Vishna Zaborski-Breton, and I'm the Director of Communications with the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the CPRA webinar on the Framework for Recreation in Canada. As I mentioned earlier, there has been a great amount of interest, so I think we'll see our numbers continue to rise over the next couple minutes. And we do have participants from across Canada, which speaks to the importance and interest of today's topic. As some of you may know, CPRA has hosted several webinars over the last couple years, which provide tools, resources, and best practices for parks and recreation practitioners in Canada. Topics that we have covered have included physical literacy, connecting to nature, recreation programming in the after-school time period, as well as a session on children's mental health. So for a complete listing of our past webinars and to learn about upcoming presentations, I would encourage you to visit the website www.cpra.ca and follow CPRA on Facebook and Twitter. I also wanted to let you all know that today's webinar will be recorded and it will be posted on the CPRA website for a future reference for yourselves and for anyone who could not join us today on the webinar. During today's presentation, you'll have an opportunity to participate in the discussion through polls that will pop up on your screen, and there will be some evaluation questions following the presentation, as well as an opportunity to ask questions via the chat box, which everyone is very familiar with there, and we've got some banter going on already, so we can ask questions following the presentation afterwards. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Leisure Information Network for providing us with technical support on today's webinar. And should we need any assistance, Jennifer Pelche is on the line with us today. So thanks, Jennifer, for your support. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome our presenter today. Kathy Jo Noble is the Executive Director for CPRA, and she has held a leadership role throughout the development of the Framework for Recreation in Canada. CJ's role has included supporting the planning process for all three national framework gatherings, coordinating framework feedback from all the provinces and territories, as well as co-chairing the National Framework Working Group. CJ also presented the framework for endorsement at the ministerial meeting in February of 2015 in Prince George, British Columbia. CJ will now co-chair the Framework Implementation and Monitoring Steering Group and will provide national leadership via CPRA throughout the implementation period. During her tenure as Executive Director, CJ has led CPRA on other key priority items in the sector, including infrastructure, professional development, and an active federal advocacy program. CJ has acquired specialized skills and knowledge in her over 20 years of experience in public affairs, including serving as a senior advisor to federal cabinet ministers and as the vice president at a top public affairs and communications firm. So with that, I would like to now turn things over to CJ. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I know everybody has very busy schedules, so I appreciate that you've taken the time and valued what the framework will bring to the sector to join us today. The framework is a critical document for the recreation sector, and it provides us a path forward. And today, during the webinar, I'm going to speak to the process of how we reached the framework in its current state. I'll speak to the content of the framework, and then we'll discuss implementation, which is at its early stages, and the next steps accordingly. I'll stop after I discuss the content of the framework, and that way if anybody has any questions, we can address that at that time, and then I'll continue on to discuss implementation efforts. So Jennifer, I was wondering if we could conduct the poll now just in regard to understanding who on the line has actually been involved in the consultation process for the framework. Thanks. Thank you for that. So it looks like we have a number of people who have been involved, but actually more who haven't been involved yet with the consultative process. So that helps me to understand some of the points that I'll focus on today. So the Framework for Recreation in Canada has been a joint initiative between CPRA and the Interprovincial Sport and Recreation Council. And this has been a tremendous example of how provincial and territorial governments and NGOs can work together to make progress on mutual interests. The process to where we are today and the content of the framework was developed over 3 years. There was a working group which led the process, and that working group had members from CPRA, from provincial governments, academics, from other sectors, and representation from all geographic regions of Canada. That working group steered a process for 3 national gatherings, many regional dialogues that happened in every province and every territory, and also involving other sectors as we developed the document. So we feel very confident that the document, which was endorsed by the sector and the provincial and territorial ministers, reflects the views of sector leaders, of those who work in the sector, those sectors that are aligned to the work we do and our goals, and the government partners. The Framework for Recreation in Canada provides a new vision for recreation, and it invites leaders, practitioners, stakeholders, and volunteers to collaborate in the pursuit of common priorities. And it aims to improve the well-being of individuals, communities, and built and natural environments. So why develop a recreation framework? What was the driving reasons behind this process when it began 3 years ago? And there was a number of reasons why the time was right for us to move forward in developing this document in partnership with our provincial and territorial governments. Recreation had become increasingly a more individual-based, facility-focused, and user-paid service. There are also a number of emerging needs due to technology, economic, environmental, demographic, and social changes that we as a sector needed to ensure that we were still responding to. As everyone knows, the costs related to health and well-being has been a persistent challenge in Canada, and a framework was one of the pieces that could be the solution to this. Many experts across Canada agreed that the sector would benefit at this time from a guiding document, and it would allow us to lead in effective and coordinated policies and practices in recreation. The recreation framework also aims to provide a focused effort across Canada to identify concrete ways we can work together with all people to enjoy recreation. I see, Lisa, you asked what other sectors we worked with in the consultations. We worked with a number of sectors, including physical activity, sport, health. We worked with Aboriginal communities and leadership. So we felt that we certainly covered off a number of our partners who work with us. So now that we have the framework and we were developing it, the question was, how would it be used? And when we developed the framework, these were what we anticipated the uses to be. As the implementation unfolds, we may find that we haven't even captured all the opportunities that the framework provides. We thought that it would lead the sector in a variety of different ways, that it could guide decision-making and planning and resource allocations for those in the recreation sector, that it would be a document that would be user-friendly at the municipal and community level for planning. that it would continue to foster a positive relationship between the sector and all government. And as I noted before, CPRA and the sector as a whole had a really positive experience working with IRSC on developing this document. And we also were able to ensure we had the support of the federal government along the way. Recreation doesn't fall within the federal jurisdiction, but a number of the outcomes of the framework directly provide solutions to many federal challenges. We also hope that the framework will be used to foster positive as a guiding document for the field of recreation across Canada. And later in my presentation, I'll discuss more details about how we would see the document being used in its implementation stage. And most importantly, we're hoping that the framework will be a force in addressing many of the challenges and emerging trends, such as physical inactivity. So I wondered, Jennifer, again, if we could do the poll at this time, just so we can get a sense about who has began working with the framework and applying it to the work you're doing at your organization, your government, or your community. Okay, so it looks like it's about evenly split. About 50% of people have began to use it and apply it, and about 50% have not. So I see it certainly in the early stages of implementation. I'm really pleased to see that half of the folks on the call today actually have began applying it. And I look forward later on in the presentation to talking about some of the tools and support that will be provided to those who have not yet applied it, or to enhance the efforts of those who have. So I'm just going to get a little bit into the detail of the content of the framework. And the working group, which I spoke of earlier, led the process in actually writing the framework. And there was a writing team within that working group who led that process. And I can tell you that every word on the document was really very, very carefully crafted to reflect what we had heard in the national gatherings and the regional gatherings. So on this slide, you see the definition of recreation that is outlined in the framework. That is an experience that results from freely chosen participation in physical, social, intellectual, creative, and spiritual pursuits that enhance individual and community well-being. And as I say, there was a lot of careful consideration that went into how those words would be crafted. We also developed a renewed vision, and that vision focuses on three elements, really, which are very interconnected with each other. I don't think one exists without the other, and that's individual well-being, the well-being of our natural and built environments, and as well as community well-being. And for those of you who want to actually reference the document as I'm walking through it, you can see that Carrie has put on the chat box a link that will allow you to follow me through as we talk about the content. So this next document I find to be very valuable, and I encourage you to use this diagram when you're talking with your colleagues and leaders in your communities or provinces or territories, because it's a very good visual snapshot of what the content of the framework is. And some of the pieces may seem obvious to us that these would be the elements of what a framework for recreation should be, but it has never been captured into the framework in this type of way. where we're able to use the framework and this diagram to show colleagues, other sectors, leaders, politicians, decision makers, where we collectively, as a sector, see us going. So as I noted before, there's the vision, which references individual well-being, the well-being of natural and built environments, and community well-being. We also listed 3 values: public good, inclusion and equity, and sustainability. And again, I encourage you, if you haven't had the chance to, after the call, review the full document, because this really is just a sketch of what is in there. And then we developed 5 goals. Again, all of this was developed because of what we heard at the national and regional consultations, what we heard from other sectors, and what we knew were the priority pieces that many of the provincial and territorial governments were committed to. So the 5 goals, again, very interconnected. They really support and almost need each other in order to achieve what we want to as a sector. And they're active living, and active living really focuses on participation throughout your life course, physical literacy, play, and essentially reducing sedentary behavior. And as I say, the document goes into that in much more detail. Inclusion and access, ensuring that there's an opportunity for equitable participation in recreation, regardless of your socioeconomic status, age, culture, race, Aboriginal status, gender, ability, sexual orientation, or geographic location. The next one has certainly to date received a lot of pickup: connecting people and nature. And this is really talking about the natural spaces and places, parks, and ensuring that there's public awareness and education to the benefits of embracing those spaces, and also ensuring that our recreation in those natural spaces is minimizing a negative impact we could have on it. Supportive environments, I'm sure everyone can relate to this one and the challenges that the sector faces in regard to having appropriate infrastructure, spaces, and places in order to recreate or ensure that individuals in their community can recreate. And so this goal certainly focuses on renewing the infrastructure in communities, active transportation, recreation education, assessment tools, and alignment with community initiatives. And the last goal is a little bit more inward-looking, but ensuring that our sector has the capacity to achieve what the framework has outlined, and that's ensuring that within our sector we have capacity and sustainability, and that references career development, education, leadership, volunteering, and knowledge development. What's important to consider is that when we feel that all the goals are interconnected, and CPRA and others nationally will be moving forward on all 5 goals. But what's important is when you're looking at this from your own community, your own organization, or province or territory, you may choose to zero in on 1 or 2 of those goals, because that's what your capacity will allow, or that's reflective of the priorities of your decision makers. And that's okay. We want to make movement nationally on all goals. But if certain communities and certain provinces and territories are focusing in on some, we're going to be able to share those best practices nationally, and we're going to be able to move the yardstick forward. Now, we're aware when we were developing as a sector, we were quite aware that when we developed the framework, we were developing it at a time when there were a number of other policies and frameworks and agendas in place. And it was really important for us to ensure that when we developed that framework, that it was being developed in collaboration with those other pieces that exist, because we wanted to be aware that for someone, a practitioner or a community leader, um, they do not want to be bombarded with yet another document that they're supposed to implement or apply without it actually being supportive and parallel to other documents and frameworks that are out there. So we worked very closely with representatives from Active Canada 2020 and also from the Canadian Sport Policy. And we ensured that language and goals supported each other, but understanding that each piece had its own separate goals that it needed to state. We also wrote it ensuring that it aligned with a number of other strategies, and that includes connecting Canadians with nature, which just came out last year in the midst of our framework development, the Declaration of Prevention and Promotion, Healthy Aging in Canada, and Indigenous Action. So we hope that communities and sector leaders will see that those documents are reflected in ours. And as we move forward with implementation, we're going to want to make sure that we continue that collaboration so that communities and leaders, provinces and territories can implement all of them in a parallel manner. So just to chat a little bit about endorsement and of the document, our last national gathering, the final one, was in November of 2014. And at that gathering, those who attended from the sector endorsed the document. The framework has also received formal endorsement and commitment to implementation from CPRA. Then, as Vishna mentioned, in February, I traveled to Prince George to co-present with Anna Alinsky from Ontario government, my co-chair on the working group, and we presented the framework to PT ministers, and they endorsed it. They also, what I was really pleased about is CPRA had been working with the federal government closely, again, recognizing recreation was not a federal jurisdiction. The benefits that recreation provides to communities and to individuals certainly contributed to the goals of the federal government. So I was very pleased that the Minister for Sport, when he was at that PT ministerial meeting, also made a point of indicating that the federal government supported the framework. And that really gives us a good place to jump from in regard to now engaging the federal government on implementation. So as I say, endorsement doesn't mean a commitment to every goal and every priority. The framework is very encompassing, but it means that implementation strategies are at the discretion of each stakeholder and each government partner. We view that this document was drafted based on consultations with Canadians and other sectors in the recreation sector, and it's really owned by all those in the sector and the governments who supported it and helped write it as well. So we really see this as a document where everyone is owning it, and that implementation is going to take place at a community level as well as a national level, provincial, territorial level, inside our sector, outside our sector. All of those elements need to happen for us to see a successful implementation and actually be able to measure a meaningful progress. So the next section I'm going to talk about is implementation. But before the content of the framework, can you hear me, Laurie? Okay. Sorry about the sound cutting out there. So I don't know where I cut out, but what I was just pausing was to see if anybody had any questions at this time on the content, on the process, or the endorsement. I'm just pausing here while we give people a chance to type their questions in. So I'll just address the first question from you, Sean, in regard to getting local municipalities on board. I know that I have heard from some municipalities that they have successfully had their municipal government, I guess, endorse it or declare that they would implement the framework. And I think that I can't speak to the details of how they achieve that, but I can indicate that there's a couple of tools we're going to be developing in order to help municipalities and communities be able to present it to the decision makers and offer them templates about endorsement. I also think that as we begin the implementation, we want to make sure we have a best practice collection so that individual communities can learn from others about how they've been able to get support and get it to move forward. And I guess I can only suggest as well that if you can work with other partners in regard to the other benefits, health, economics, and so forth in the community, and have them work with you to try and support the document. Those are some initial thoughts, but I think that as we get moving in regard to sharing best practices that are starting to unfold in communities, you might be able to get some success. And I already see that some folks are sharing some of the some ideas that are working for them as well. Okay, so I'm going to continue to take questions, but I'm going to move on to the implementation aspects, and then at the very end, we can talk about the content I've spoke about plus the implementation. So I want to emphasize that implementation is at the beginning stages, so I may not be able to answer all the questions that may come up about how it's going to be implemented and monitored. As I say, we see this not owned by governments and not owned by CPRA, but that there's going to be countless partners and communities that will be working and learning together on the implementation. As I mentioned earlier, there was a working group that consisted of provincial government, academics, CPRA representatives, and other pieces, other partners, that the working group developed the framework. That working group has closed its work, and there's now a new implementation and monitoring working group that's being put together. Right now, IRSC, and CPRA are looking together and will, over the course of the summer, to prepare terms of references for this working group and develop a work plan. Once that's in place, then we will better be able to determine the additional members or additional advisors that we're going to want to have with us on that working group based on what our work plan unfolds. Sorry, I'm just going to move to the next slide because I forgot to do that. We're also going to certainly have national leadership from CPRA. Over the next month or so, we're going to be putting together supporting tools, communications tools, as well as uh, I'm going to, on the next slide, show some of the other tools we're hoping that will help with the community, um, and some of the things that have been referenced in the chat group here. So we're going to be putting tools together, sending them to our PT partners, and our PT partners will then be sharing them with the communities. We're also going to be providing tools that other sectors can use, aligning sectors as they begin implementation as well. Although it's not identified yet, because we need to look at the work plan that the working group I referenced before will be doing, but there also may be some national items that we will need leadership from CPRA on. I'm just giving an example of something, and I don't know if it will be the case, but something like ensuring that the curriculums for recreation studies, physical activity, and sports studies across Canada and university and colleges reflects the framework. That may be something the working group may lead, or that may be something that CPRA may lead. But I think there will be some national leadership on certain items that we're going to pursue. Jocelyn, I see your question. I'm just going to, on the next slide, I'll be able to talk to you about the tools that specifically we'll be developing, and I'm also going to give you a chance to input into what tools would actually be of value to you. Also, each province and territorial park and recreation association will be working with the provincial and territorial governments to determine their priorities and their implementation plans. And together, they will, as I said, choose some priorities that they're going to focus on, and then move forward the framework in each of the regions on how it makes the most sense in each of their government and territorial priorities. As I said, community leadership is going to be critical, and we're going to, at CPRA, put together tools to help support that in regard to communicating and promoting it in the communities. And aligned partners, I continue to meet nationally with a number of our partners in sport and physical activity, Aboriginal, aging communities, children, and so forth, to make sure that they are aware of the framework and that they are making links to how the framework supports their agenda, and looking to see how we can work together and support them in implementing it. I referenced the academic community earlier, and then I know Punch and Carry are on the line from Lynn, maybe others as well, but we see Lynn having a critical role. They've had an important role to date in regard to being the information hub as we went through the consultations, and also being important participants on the consultations. And we think that that role is critical to continue, especially, as I say, because best practices within communities is going to be critical for sharing and for everybody to take the lead on certain goals and certain activities and share that nationally with others. Again, we're at the early stages of implementation, so we have to work through the various objectives. Measurable and meaningful progress on all 5 goals at a national, provincial, territorial, community, and partner level is critical. And the working group will be defining how measurable and meaningful progress can be gathered on a national level. Certainly in Prince George, the ministers indicated that they want to hear from CPRA and from the provincial and territorial governments about implementation progress, how it's been measured, and if it's been meaningful. So that is yet to be defined of how we do that, and that's the priority certainly of the working group. We've had an excellent relationship, as I say, with the sector and with provincial and territorial governments. And as we move to engagement, we're seeking equal engagement, certainly, from both sectors, and a continued positive partnership. What we want to ensure, too, is implementation. A first step is going to, in a sense, be in your jurisdiction, looking at an inventory of your current activities. That's step one. And seeing how those current activities apply to each of the goals and the overall objectives of the framework. But we also want to see it beyond that. We want to see a step 2 where new policies and new programs are being put in place, or policies and programs are being readjusted to ensure that, in fact, they are furthering the goals of the framework. As I've noted, between LIN and CPRA, we're looking on ways to share best practices across Canada. And we want to support communities, ensuring that everyone, every practitioner, everyone who works for a community or municipality in some way in the recreation sector can see how their role contributes to that a larger piece and a larger national plan of how we achieve key goals within the framework. We're looking to see the application of a framework lens as we develop strategic planning at all levels. So CPRA board just met last week and discussed how we'd ensure that all of our decisions would have that framework lens on it. And this, I hope, will happen in PT associations, in governments, and in communities when folks are sitting down to make their planning for the next year, that they're planning with that framework lens on. As I noted, there will be national leadership and certainly advocacy to federal decision makers on identified priorities. And we're also, as I said, going to be providing tools for implementation. And there's just lots of different thoughts about how we may go about implementing, and some of them may be a national gathering, potentially in 2017, maybe a leaders roundtable, an online community or online gathering, or specific forums such as a parks forum that would support one of the goals specifically. So here's a little bit more concrete, and that would answer your question, Jocelyn, a bit about what tools. So I had the opportunity at our CPRA board meeting last week to talk to our PT members and understand what are the most important tools. What are the tools that you want us to prioritize and work on first in order to help members across Canada in communities and governments and associations move things forward. So one thing we heard clear was an executive summary of the framework, simplification that allows people to more quickly and easily explain the content and the objectives. A PowerPoint deck on the framework, it's already on the LIN site and the CPRA site, and that's yours to use as you present the framework, and it gives you some broad strokes, quite similar to what I've provided today. People indicated planning tools would be important, workbooks or tools that municipalities and communities can use at the table when they're in their planning process. High on the list of interest was measurement and evaluation templates, and that's something that we need to work out with the working group, with the experience of Lynn and the experience of some PT partners as well, ensuring that there's templates to measure progress nationally, but more importantly, that communities have these templates to measure progress within their own community or province, territory. This speaks a bit to what I know Sean has referenced, is template declarations or resolutions for endorsements of the framework. As I mentioned, some cities, we've heard that some cities and communities have already endorsed the framework sort of formally. I don't want to say that we're hung up in that. What we want you to do is use it as much as you can in your daily work. But if those are important steps, is to get the decision makers to formally have a declaration or resolution in support of the framework, we're going to put some templates together to help you have something to start with. And we'll also be learning from those who have already had success in that. The best practice collection I've referenced. And then the training webinars. Today's webinar, of course, is just sort of broad strokes to let you know what the framework is, how we got there, and where we think we're going on implementation. But once we have some of the planning tools actually in place, we'd like to look towards webinars for practitioners in the communities on how to best use these tools and the practices. So I'm just going to pause there for a moment because at this point, Jennifer's going to pop up a poll because I'd really like a takeaway from everyone on this call as to which of these tools would be of value to you, and you're able to select the top three. And that's really going to allow me to use our capacity at CPRA to the best use to ensure you're receiving what's really important and is really going to be valuable to your community. So what we're due is ensure that we send this poll result out later so that you can see what others are saying in regard to some of their priorities. Just looking as the polls come in, some of the most popular pieces at this point are planning tools that would be used at a community level. Also the executive summary or a simplification of the framework. And then, not surprising because I've heard this message loud and clear, is measurement and evaluation templates. So certainly as we go through questions, you can continue to respond to the poll. And as I say, I'll share that. And it was going to very much direct our resources at CPRA into what, and the working group work plan as well as to what we want to focus on. So that's the end of my presentation. As I say, I'm just going to pause for a few minutes and see if anybody has questions they want to raise now. But I want you to feel reassured that you're free to contact Vishna or myself at any time at CPRA if you want to talk to us about what you're doing or challenges that you're facing. And we can hopefully connect you with a community that has had success on that, or give you some guidance from what we're doing at a national level. So as I say, I'm just going to pause for a minute because I can see a couple folks are typing in some questions. And then we just have a final question we're putting up as well, and we want to make sure that these webinars are of value to you. So if you have any content that you'd like to suggest for a future webinar, I know Jennifer's going to pop that up so that you can insert some suggestions, and we make sure that we're providing the most valuable webinars to you. Doug has asked how many people are on this webinar. There's 40 participants right now. And then as Vishna says, we pop it up on our website, and we do find that we get a lot of pickup in that regard for people listening to it when they have a chance that works better for them. Timelines, Laurie has asked about timelines on next steps. Certainly, I mean, the working group will be meeting, I would assume, within the next month or two to get the work plan together and start to move forward, certainly in earnest by the fall with additional members and implementing what needs to be done on the work plan. CPRA, in regard to getting out those tools, we know that timeliness is of the essence. So I would say within the month, we will be able to have those tools, at least some of them, ready and starting to head out to municipalities. Some of the stuff like the measurement tools are going to take a little bit more work and work with the working group to make sure we're providing you the best tool possible. So. Great. I don't know if I see any more specific questions, but I do see some good connections being made amongst the participants, and good news about what some folks are already up to. So I guess at this point, as I say, webinars are very awkward opportunities to ask questions. So please make sure that you give me an email or a call, or Vishna. We're more than happy to have a one-on-one dialogue with you and make sure that you have the support you need to move it forward in your jurisdiction. So thank you. I'm just encouraged by the interest and the number of participants because this framework, as I say, has been developed by the sector, is owned by the sector, and we need all hands on deck in order to have measurable progress on it.
Okay, and with that, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank CJ for taking time to share such fantastic information about the framework, the process, and where we are all headed next with the implementation of the framework in recreation. Um, and so with that, if there's any other questions, please feel free to contact us. Our email address, you can reach me at info@cpra.ca. And as CJ mentioned, we'd be happy to answer any questions. Once the recording has been made available, we'll post that on the CPRA website, and we will share that on our social media, our Facebook and Twitter. So I do encourage everyone to follow us on social media and hear about upcoming webinars as well. So with that, thanks again, CJ, and thank you everyone for your participation in this webinar, and I hope you have a great day. Take care now.